This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 255 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I've got a deep dive interview episode for you today. You will probably remember I'm doing these about once a month or so when I find people that I just want to talk to for an entire episode because I know they're going to have amazing things to say. And that is absolutely the case with this one. I've interviewed Vincie Ho, and so here we are, 255, Vincie Ho's deep dive into thoughtful travel. So regular listeners, or if you're in my Facebook or LinkedIn groups, you will probably remember me talking about the course I've just taken with the Rise Travel Institute. Actually, I presented my final project for that course as episode 252. So if you've listened to that, you'll definitely be familiar with my course. So today's guest is actually the founder and executive director of the Rise Travel Institute. I got to know Vincie through the monthly online meetups during the course, and I knew that I would love to have a proper deep dive chat with her. I mean, basically, she developed an entire curriculum on thoughtful travel, so she is the perfect guest for this podcast. I wanted to start back at the beginning and find out how Vincie's travel career started, so I asked her about her first trip abroad.
The very first time that I traveled abroad was when I was in third grade. My parents took me and my brother to Hokkaido, Japan, and it was during a brutal winter. It was minus 20, and I was sick for the whole minus 20 degrees Celsius.
Why did they choose Hokkaido in the middle of winter? To go skiing?
Yeah, so my parents, they didn't have a lot, but they really wanted us to have, very special travel experiences. So they said, well, you guys have never seen snow, so would you like to go to Japan, and then we can play in the snow, and then we can learn how to ski. And they were really trying to be thoughtful for their children, they wanting the snow experience for us. But then it was so cold that I got sick for the entire week. I just kept puking every meal.
Oh no!
So I'm not sure if this was supposed to be in the podcast.
It's okay. It's real life travels.
Yeah, it was very real. I was 9 years old, and I actually got to enjoy. I mean, I didn't feel sick except for when I was at dinner time. Things just couldn't. My body just couldn't digest the food that I took. But then I was playing happily with other kids on the tour. We joined a tour. Back in the days, that was the only option. People didn't know, especially people from Hong Kong back then. It was organized tours mostly, and backpacking wasn't a thing, especially for families. So we were in a group, and there were, I don't know, like 10 kids in our tour.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah, so we were it was really fun. And the one thing that I really regretted was because I was so sick that it was really cold, and I had to stay in the hotel, and my parents had to stay with me to take care of me, and they missed the Sapporo Snow Festival. That was supposed to be the most beautiful, ice carving festival in Asia. So they missed that, and it's still one of my dreams to take them back to Sapporo. Well, we did go back as a family, but it was in summer, so
no ice festival.
So it was different. Yeah, but I still really hope that one day I can take them back to Sapporo in wintertime to just, go back to the Sapporo Snow Festival.
I've seen pictures of it. It's amazing, isn't it?
I know, it is.
Very special.
So that was my very first travel experience outside of Hong Kong. And the first time that I traveled abroad alone without my parents was when I was studying in France. So I was staying with my host family in Brittany, who I'm still very much in touch with, and who basically adopted me as their third daughter. And I
Oh,
still go back to see
nice.
them almost every year, until the pandemic hit. So yeah, around that time, I decided to go backpacking by myself with a couple of guidebooks and a giant DSLR camera that I borrowed from a friend that I had absolutely no idea how to use. And then I just traveled around in France as a 19, 20-year-old Asian girl. I went to Provence, Alsace, the West Coast, Normandy, and yeah, and one day I got stuck in Chamonix, in the Alps because the National Railway was on strike.
Oh no. Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, right? And then I just looked around and I couldn't, I didn't know what to do, and I found a school bus and I just, hopped on and talked to the driver. I said I needed to leave this place, and he said, "Yeah, come on in."
Oh, really?
And then
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
and then I just hopped on a school bus full of kids, like school kids going back to Lyon from the excursion. And that was my first.
And that's magical. Wow. You're a genius.
Yeah, but that was the first time that I said to myself, wow, like people are really nice, right? Like when you have the courage to interact with them and just ask, people usually, generally would be willing to help, especially when you're, alone in trouble.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
two American girls, who I later met on the road. I mean, I told them about this and they said, wow, you're very brave. And honestly, back in the day, like back then, I had no idea why they said that. But now looking back, I'd say, yeah, maybe there's a fine line between courage and recklessness, right? But a
Yeah.
school bus full of kids, maybe that was safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Probably a lot safer than
exactly.
any other option at that
A lot.
moment. But it still
Exactly.
takes courage to go into that situation and to speak to them. And it's a foreign language, and there's all
Yeah.
sorts of, and it's it's a bit unusual. Like they're not
Exactly.
supposed to just pick up random backpackers and
Exactly.
yeah.
I
Oh,
was
wow.
I probably was looking very hopeless and helpless.
Probably. Well, that's that's useful sometimes. Hey, can I go back a step? What made you want to go to study in France?
That goes back to when I was 12, when I graduated from primary school, and with my mom, I guess, I think this is something that might sound funny to a lot of people, like who are non-Chinese, but for ethnic Chinese, like having to learn the Chinese language as a kid is actually really tough.
I believe
Like
it.
having to learn all the strokes and how to write thousands of characters, right? So I struggled a lot. I actually did really well in school when I was young, but I struggled with the Chinese language.
Right.
So when I graduated from primary school, I told my mom I don't want to continue with Chinese. I want to learn French because, well, French just came up like that, like so randomly, because French was one of the most popular foreign language or third language that people learn, in Hong Kong, especially. There was a migration wave back then, before 1997, and people wanted to learn French to be able to emigrate to Canada, right?
Right.
So, yeah, because they would have like more points in
Yes,
the application.
exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I said, yeah, I don't want to learn Chinese anymore. I want to learn French. And then my mom was like, well, but you still, if you want to learn French, that's fine, but you still would need to learn Chinese because I want you to be able to, read a newspaper and write in Chinese when you grow up. So I said, okay. Then I gave in, and then I learned an extra language just because of that.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Started at the age of 14 at l'Alliance Française. I started to pick up the language, and so naturally, when I grew up, when I went to college, I majored in French, and And then I decided to study in France. That was it.
That's awesome. Isn't it funny the way the paths
I
that
know.
life can take from pretty random
Exactly.
decisions, but yeah.
I still remember vividly that conversation with my mom,
Wow.
and it is magical because it changed my life. It changed my entire life. I became a French lecturer for 1.5 decades afterwards, and now even sustainable travel, the one thing that I'm doing right now is thanks to the study abroad experience and all the travels that took place afterwards, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's you imagine if you hadn't taken up French, what would you have done? Because you wouldn't have gone
Yeah,
abroad, and then all sorts of doors wouldn't have opened, and who knows what you
exactly.
would have done or where you'd be now. So, as you can hear, Vincie is the kind of traveller who approaches travel in a really similar way to me. So, that made me want to ask her what she considers makes a trip successful.
It's really hard to define success. To me, I would say a successful trip to me is a trip that is sustainable and thoughtful. So, a trip that involves a minimum of carbon footprint from on my part, and a trip that has some sort of social good component in it, like whether it is supporting local women cooperatives or visiting an organization that is involved in sustainable community development, or maybe visiting a genuine animal sanctuary. So, and also like a trip that is successful to me would involve chances to create deep connections with people, like with the locals and also travelers that you meet along the way. Like for example, I love homestays. The kind of homestays I talk about is not like one night thing, but at least for a few days, where you get enough time to get to know the local people and listen to their stories and try their food and experience the way they live. That's exactly how again, became a member of my French host family. And I also got a host family in Thailand. And it's like you're creating homes and building families around the world.
Oh,
Yeah, so a
it's
dream
beautiful.
trip, a successful trip for me is that it has to contain all these elements that I care about, like, deep connection with the people, deep connection with animals in an ethical way, and also a deep connection with the nature, with the environment. Not just, very often, I mean, mass tourism is pretty much like a group of people rushing to different places within a short period of time, taking pictures and really, objectifying the culture or the people that they at the places that they visit, right? So this is something that I try to avoid. I mean, I did that before, and now I try to avoid. And I really enjoy like going to one place and like take my time and let everything sink in and soak in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really agree with Vincie's ideas about how we can think about our travels to make them sustainable and thoughtful. And next, I wanted to get down to travel on a more personal level, and so I asked her how she has been changed by travel.
Yeah, travel has changed me completely. Before my study abroad experience, before then, I was a rather ignorant young person, completely uninterested in politics and history. I was doing really well in school, and that was pretty much it. I was very focused on that one subject. And then I just, had zero knowledge about what's going on in the world and being completely, yeah, I need to use the word again, ignorant, because that was what it was. When I studied in France, French people love talking about politics, right?
Yeah.
Especially, and I liked so much hanging out with them, and that's how I learned. That's how I picked up my French,
Yeah.
especially slang, right? So I hung out with them all the time, but then I realized that I couldn't. So often I just couldn't contribute to any topics of conversation because I just didn't know anything back then. They were talking about contemporary politics or like even a little bit back in the history. We talked about, Second World War and the legacy. And I had my first Jewish friend and I had a Muslim friend and I had a first friend in class who was from Palestine. And then one day, we were making a class T-shirt with all the names and and the countries we're from, and the organizer deliberately put Israel after her name, and she was in tears, and I did not understand what was happening, and I had no clue.
Yep.
And then like all these incidents had to, just drove me, kind of motivated me to to get educated, to start reading about history around the world, what's going on, and why are people reacting in such a way, and why are people like offended when we're not using the right word, and why are Taiwanese insist on not being called Chinese. Back in the days, I just was very insensitive about all these issues, but now I came to the realization that these are important things to them, right?
Yep.
And if I didn't have this chance to study abroad and be exposed to so many people from different cultures, I wouldn't have known. I would still be in my bubble, maybe graduating with a first honor, and then go into, I don't know, like finance or law
some
firm
corporate kind of,
corporate,
yeah,
and still not knowing what's going on out there.
And not knowing that you didn't know, which is the scary part.
Not knowing, exactly. So that was my first experience where I felt vulnerable because for the first time, I realized like how much I didn't know, and that really motivated me to like start reading more and talking to different people more. And there was another time, I asked so many stupid questions as well. I mean, either I didn't dare to ask questions, I would just sit there for the whole night not saying a word, or I would ask stupid questions that I still regret today. I remember I was doing my master's in the UK, and I told a friend from Singapore who was going to the same college, and I was like, "Wow, you speak really good English."
Oh no! Oh no!
and she was like, "Because we speak English in Singapore." I didn't even get why she was so offended at the time because I was giving her a compliment. But now, of course, you know why. That was so stupid. That is so telling that we all have so many unconscious biases about other people, other cultures, and travel really forces you to come into contact with these other cultures and make you think, what assumptions you have about them and who they actually really are. So, yeah. So,
and you care as well because it affects someone someone you've met or a friend, and like with the Palestinian girl in your class, like then you care a lot more about what's the story here because you can connect it to a real living person who you like or trust or whatever. So
absolutely. I have a friend of mine. I'm not going to mention his name to protect his identity. He's a refugee from Togo, and we were friends. We hung out quite often in Hong Kong because I was supporting. I was volunteering with a refugee empowerment organization back then, and one day we met up for lunch. And when I saw him, I was like, "Hey, well, let's go. I'm starving." And then, and then he looked at me with his eyes wide open, staring into my eyes, and said, "Is that what you call starving?"
Oh, you poor thing. I bet you've never said that again.
I never said that again, I promise. I was like, wow, that moment was so powerful. Things that we take so for granted and so casually could actually have like, so layered meanings for other people, right? Who have experienced trauma and hunger or just like things that you cannot imagine living in a comfortable world, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that was to talk about privilege, is one thing that we talk a lot about at Rise Travel Institute. And it is so true. When you travel, you realize how much privilege you are, whether, even though I'm an Asian, right? So I'm not at the extreme of the color spectrum, so to say. But when I was volunteering in Africa, I realized that, even though I'm not Asian, but I was pretty much perpetuating white saviorism. So I took part in that. And even though I'm not white, but I shared the privilege of people from developed countries.
Yeah.
And benefited from the power difference or power dynamics and the feel good factor as well, believing that I was making a difference. I was doing something good, but actually having a very small positive impact, if any, and a lot of negative impact on the people who I interacted with.
What were you doing there? What kind of work or project were you doing?
Yeah, so I was in Rwanda, and I was in children project. So basically, yeah, I know, like the one thing that we're told not to do now.
Yes, well, exactly. Yeah. We know a lot more now. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But then I actually, I didn't know the negative impacts that I would have through what you call it, volunteerism or like orphanage tourism or whatever you call it. Back then, I didn't know that it was harmful.
Of course.
But even when I was there, like during the experience, I started to realize that something was wrong because, every day I was just like, hanging out with the children, like walking around, like not really having anything substantial to do, or like not really having a task to help them build something or develop a curriculum. There was nothing like that. I was just like, hang out in the orphanage, taking care of sick kids and like taking them to the clinic. But then I wasn't speaking the local language, so someone had to come with me anyway, right? So what was
yeah, of course, yeah.
What was my place in that whole situation? Like how much help did I, could I really offer? And also, we were with a few volunteers, we kind of like, how to say it, like we contributed to a pool of money to buy a whole bunch of hen, like chicken for the orphanage, so that we were thinking that, okay, maybe you teach them how to raise the chicken, then they'll have eggs to eat, and but then the next day they just killed all the chicken for the meat.
Oh no.
Because for so long they didn't have any meat to eat, right? So it's totally understandable, but that's also the education part that was missing, right? The communication and the education and like the purpose that wasn't really clearly communicated.
Yeah, and asking them what they need rather than deciding.
Exactly. Asking them what they need rather than like us deciding what we think they would need. Yeah. So this was a whole learning experience, and also the connection that I built with the kids as well. And when I was leaving, they were in tears, and I can imagine every 2-3 weeks they would meet new people, having this hope that these people would take them home with them, and not every time it wasn't happening. So it's like constant. It's just so sad.
Yeah.
They were hoping that there was this little kid who was begging me to bring him home, but and then they realized that these people are not here to stay, and they promised that they would bring you hope in future, but then after a few weeks they're gone. I don't know how much like psychological toll that our visits had or would have on the kids, and people are not thinking about these things when they go, right?
No, exactly. Yeah. It's only a few years ago that I really learnt that this is what goes That and the case in Cambodia where a lot of them aren't even orphans and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, yeah,
Right.
but
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, lots of people still don't know because you have to dig a bit deeper to find out all this stuff. But awful.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, my answer to your question. Yeah, travel did really change me a lot, and I think that the transformational bit of it is that, there were so many learning moments, and I just keep learning along the way. And and all these mistakes that I've made kind of paved the way to what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, the learning from these experiences is just so powerful. I think that Vincie's story about the chickens is something I'll probably repeat many times in the future, as it's a simple but perfect example of how not to, help the locals when we travel. We talk a lot on the podcast about not feeling bad about what we've done in the past, things that we now see as something that's negative, but we know more about now. So, Vincie, I'm super appreciative of you for sharing these stories. So honestly, it's very useful to hear. Anyway, to finish off our chat, I asked Vincie to explain more about the Rise Travel Institute and her hopes for its future.
I started Rise Travel Institute in June 2020 in the middle of the pandemic.
Tough.
Yeah, sounds like like people are like, why? This is so counterintuitive. Like people, like organizations and companies are struggling to survive, and you're starting something. Are you sure?
Especially in the travel space, yeah.
Especially in the travel space, really. Yeah. But then I thought it was actually the best timing because, for once, everybody's not busy traveling all the time. For once, people are grounded and, really have the time to. It was in the middle of the pandemic, so a lot of people are picking up new hobbies. They have a lot of free time, and I was like, perhaps we can like really take advantage of this unexpected moment to build something to educate people, right? Because I had always wanted to build a curriculum around sustainable travel, but I never really knew how, and it was never the right timing because I was also busy traveling around too, right?
Yeah.
So never really found the time until the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, so maybe this is a good timing. And also, last June, if you still remember, in America, in the US, there was this there was this Black Lives Matter movement and anti-racist movement nationally and, pretty much internationally as well. So I just thought, anti-oppression is so important. Human rights and social justice has always been, close to my heart. And I thought, maybe I should do something that talks about both because, travel and, oppression, they are so interconnected, and people don't often see it that way because, travel seems so harmless, right?
So just fun, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just fun. But it is not, because while you're having fun, you may be harming.
Yeah, you're having an impact one way or the other. So positive or negative, but yeah.
Absolutely. So I was thinking, maybe there's a way to marry, travel, tourism, anti-oppression and build a curriculum. So that was how Rise Travel Institute started. And then very soon, people really love our mission and vision, and they started to approach us, and then slowly we've built this amazing team of volunteers, and today we have a remote team of over 40 people, and they are super dedicated, very invested, and they see Rise Travel Institute as a baby, as their baby as well. It's not just my baby.
Yeah.
And we started our pilot program this summer, and apparently students love it.
Yes. I am one, I can say for sure, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm really happy that, they found it inspiring. And then I also learned a lot from through the interaction with the students and the instructors as well. So my hopes for its future is that we can really mainstream sustainable travel education and really reach casual travelers, so that when people like before people travel, they'll come and take courses and educate themselves before they go on their trips, so that they can become more mindful travelers once they are visiting their destinations. So we will continue to build and grow and expand our curriculum to include more courses on different themes related to sustainable travel, social justice, animal protection, environmental ethics, in relation to travel. And we are also hoping to be able to build these short courses on different travel destinations to give travelers a deep dive into the history and culture of those places, and also how the legacy of history is leads to the current social, economic, and environmental issues that are affecting the local population, and also maybe tips on how to travel more sustainably, like what are the credible sustainable development projects that travelers can get involved in when they travel to those places. So we want to be able to put together more and more resources for travelers and tourism professionals alike, so that when they travel, they have the tools and skills and knowledge to travel more mindfully and thoughtfully.
Well, that's it from my deep dive chat with Vincie Ho. And as you can probably hear, we both enjoyed it a lot. I just love meeting and getting to chat with such like-minded fellow travel lovers and hearing their stories. So thank you so much, Vincie. And thank you all listeners for listening in to episode 255. Some links for you to chase up further info if you're keen. The Rise Travel Institute can be found online at risetravelinstitute.org. And also, if you haven't caught up with episode 252, which was the podcast version of my capstone project from my Rise course, from the certificate I was completing there, then do go and have a look at that. The topic was ethical wildlife tourism. And I got a good result, I can tell you all, so thanks. Don't forget also to come along and join one or both of our groups for Thoughtful Travellers. Have a look in Facebook if you prefer. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and you'll find us there. Or if you prefer LinkedIn, then head to notaballerina.com/LinkedIn and it will redirect you there. All of this and more will be in the show notes for this episode. The show notes are at notaballerina.com/255. So as always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.